This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. All right. So thank you. Let's begin now. After a wonderful Passover break for some of us. I haven't seen some of you for a few weeks. It's nice to see everybody happy, healthy, well, safe, and sound. If somebody asks you, is a humble person more likely to be happy or sad? How about someone that has an ego? Is a person that has an ego, are they more likely to be happy or to be sad? Someone who is entitled, are they more likely to be happy or to be sad? Right? This is a question that I think we have to ask. And this will help us understand what we are going to be discussing today. So if anybody would like to chime in, speak up, or put into the chat what they think, if a humble person is more likely to be happy or sad, if a egotistical person or a entitled person is more likely to be happy or sad, you can let me know what you think, and then we could discuss this a little bit further. There's a story of Reb Zusha from Anipali that there was once a Hasidic student who came to his teacher. Thank you, all those that are responding. He came to his teacher and he says, how can I be happy? I want to be a happy person. So he said, you have to go to Reb Zusha. And so he travels to the city of Anipali and he looks for Zusha and he asks everyone, do you know where the famous Zusha is? Because my teacher sent me to Zusha. He must be a famous guy. Everyone says, Zusha, famous? We don't know what you're talking about. And so he came, he looked around and asked around. Finally, he found the Zusha and he comes to Zusha's house. It wasn't much of a house. It was more like a hut. He comes to Zusha's hut and he sees that it's a dilapidated home, broken, leaky. The furniture is not even what to speak of. It's more of like a tree stump for a chair and more of a little plank of wood for the table. And he says, Zusha, my teacher sent me to you to ask you a question. Zusha says, okay, spend the night and tomorrow we'll talk. And so Zusha feeds him some tea and some hard bread. It's all he had, all he could afford. The next morning, the man says, Zusha, I had this question. And my question is that I want to know how a person can be happy, and especially in light of what we know. The Talmud says that a person should bless God for the good as well as for the bad, which means that we always have to be happy for good or for bad. Tell me, Zusha, I see you're very happy. How are you so happy? The Zusha says, well, you came to the wrong person because I have never experienced any bad in my life. The man says, well, what do you mean? You're living in a dilapidated house. You don't have any chairs. You don't have any tables. You don't have any food. You have a leaky roof. Your windows are cracked. What do you mean you've never experienced any bad? So she says, I don't know what you're talking about. I've never experienced any bad in my life. Zusha was telling this guy that if it's coming from God, it's not that in the future it's going to be good, but right now, this that I am experiencing is good. When we see the world that we live in, we have a choice that we can make. Either I can say this is not good enough and I deserve more or should have more, or I can say, wow, this is amazing. What's on my plate is unbelievable. How fortunate and lucky I am to have exactly what I have. Now that's typical, especially if we recognize that we don't have something. That takes a lot of work. But Zusha had taught himself that he doesn't even have any bad in his life. Everything is good. It's not that there's good and there's bad and I'm choosing to do good. I'm choosing to see only the good. For Zusha, nothing was even bad. He didn't even have a question. It wasn't even a challenge for him. So obviously we're not all on the level of Zusha. That we get, we understand that. That's a high level. But for the level that we're on, we see good, we see bad, we see challenges. And our question is, for us, how we could decipher and how we can live a life by appreciating the things that we have. And today we're going to discuss that in order to truly appreciate what we have to be prepared to go to war. And I'll explain what that means. We have to be prepared to work on ourselves. Now that's a hard word, and that's a challenging word, especially for all of us that are out of school. We don't want to work. We don't want to do homework. We don't want to take tests. We just kind of want to cruise through life. We've already gone through all our assignments that we had to go through. But we're going to see that the Rebbe points out to us, the author of the Tanya, that what is the root cause that is not allowing us as a human being to grow? One of the biggest issues that we face, that I believe is the catalyst that brings war, it is the things in this world that bring jealousy, that bring hard feelings, and that is something which we call ego. Okay? When we have an ego, sometimes that causes us to feel arrogant. Now, in a way, that's a very good thing. I feel very self-confident, and I know who I am, and therefore, this is me, right? A person may say. So what then is the problem with being arrogant? What then will be the problem with having an ego? And the crux or the root of the issue of the problem is that when a person is arrogant, a person tells themselves, I have everything. I am who I am. And therefore, I have no need to change. I have no need to grow. Who is someone who never changes, who never grows? A dead person. You go to the cemetery, the same people are there for 100 years already. They haven't moved an inch. Someone who has died doesn't grow, doesn't move. Someone who's alive moves. Someone who's alive grows. Someone who's alive has the fire inside of them to be something more, to expand oneself. An arrogant person has no room to grow, therefore they don't move, they don't change, therefore they are compared to someone who's no longer living. They're not alive. Someone who has an ego says to themselves or to those around them, I am great. If I am great, then I don't need to be greater because I am the greatest, which means I'm not alive because I'm there. I'm stagnant. And if someone is stagnant, that is one of the most challenging and problematic stages for a human being to be in. One of the biggest causes for divorce is boredom. It's better for a couple to fight with each other than to be bored. If you fight, at least you're alive. Hopefully, you can reconcile the argument and continue to live. But if you don't even talk to each other, if you're apathetic, if you don't care anymore, then you're just not alive anymore. If you're not alive, you don't even have interest in seeing the other person, talk to the other person. Inside, you're just empty and bored. Therefore, what's the purpose of being together? So getting under someone's skin, I'm not recommending it, but I'm saying that that's a sign that you are alive. Or something gets under your skin. Indifference is the hardest virtue or the hardest behavior for a teacher to deal with. When a teacher wants to motivate his students, the child is indifferent, they have a hard time motivating that child. The child argues with the teacher, that's great. Okay, the teacher has to find a way to answer the questions that the student is asking. But if the child is indifferent, they're not even there, they're somewhere else, they're just a shell of a being. So someone who is humble, meaning to say, I recognize that I know a lot of things, but I have a lot more to learn. That person is alive. Therefore, the Alter Rebbe will tell us, the author of the Tanya, in chapter 30, that a humble person has the quality of being much happier because there's room for them to grow. And when we grow, we learn. When we learn, we expand. When we expand, we're alive. When we're alive, we're happy. An arrogant person has no room for anything new in their life. Their life is just one boring, cyclical process of living. I'm not looking for anything new. I'm not looking to learn anything more. I'm not looking to make any new friends, have any interesting conversations, or grow. Because no one is interesting to me, because I am everything. An egotistical person says. A humble person says, no, of course I want to talk to someone, I want to learn something new. And this helps us understand a very important concept. That throughout life, sometimes we go and we enter into a situation where we feel that we are closed, we are sealed, and our heart is blocked. Have you ever gone through a day and you want to be happy for somebody else, but you just can't be happy? There's like a certain blockage inside of us. The Alter Rebbe terms this in chapter 29, Timtum Halev. There's a blockage of the heart. The heart is sealed. But if we are a living person, it bothers us. And we say, how can I open up my heart? I want to feel the other person. I want to be empathetic. I want to be joyful with that other person. It bothers me that I'm not. Why is my heart stuffed, closed, and congested? When we ask ourselves the question, then we are also open to the answer. And sometimes the answer is that, do you know why I cannot participate in that person's joyous occasions or that person's moment of happiness or that person's success? Do you know why? Because I don't value that person. I look down at that person because I think I'm better than that person. But the moment we think and we say, wait a second, that person has incredible talents, gifts, qualities that I don't have, then we say, wow, I'm so happy that that person got that item, that thing. That's amazing that they got that. So let's break it down on a practical level. I recently heard a story that the Alter Rebbe was approached by one of his students, and the student asked the Alter Rebbe a question that was weighing heavily on his heart. And he basically poured out his heart to the Alter Rebbe, telling him of all the great sins, terrible things, transgressions that he did. Things that even to the Alter Rebbe's ears were just blowing him away, that this person had done all these terrible things, unfathomable concepts or behaviors. The Alter Rebbe wrote the book that we're studying now, the Tanya, because he was getting all of these requests from different students, and he didn't have time to answer each student individually. So he put his answers into this book form that we have to all human issues, human questions, human troubles, and human failures. But in this case, the Alter Rebbe couldn't answer this person. The Alter Rebbe says that whenever someone comes to me with a problem or with a sin, a transgression that they did, I have to find that sin within me also. I have to find that bad behavior, that transgression in me also. This way I could feel for that person and hopefully help that person and guide that person. But if I don't have it in me, I never did that, how can I relate to that person? So in order for me to relate to that person, I have to find, even if it's on a smaller scale, on a minute detail, or on another way of doing this sin, I have to be able to relate to that person. But when this guy came in, I couldn't relate to it. I couldn't find anything inside of me of where I had done any of those things, even on the slightest way, until I meditated over what this guy was telling me. And I realized that this person has 7 incredible qualities that I do not have. And the moment I realized that I could look up to this person for these qualities, I was able to relate to him and able to help this person out. Meaning to say that when we look at another person and we see them and we see their quality that they have, that we don't have, that humbles us in front of them. At the moment we are humbled in front of them, we can actually be there for that person. We can actually help them out. I'm reading the responses in the chat box. Okay, all very good answers, and we're going to expound upon it. In America today, and perhaps in the world, we are trained with one of the holy grails, the thou shall nots, that we cannot, God forbid, violate, and that is that we are not allowed to judge another person. Don't you dare judge somebody else. Who are you to judge me? From my little short life's experience, I can tell you that people that say, who are you to judge? You can't judge anybody. They're the most judgmental people of all. And I'll explain in a second. Judaism says that we are to judge another person. What does that mean, to judge? We are not to judge them for their bad behavior, but we are to judge them for their positive qualities. Understand? We cannot judge a person badly, but we can judge them favorably. And we should judge every person favorably. So to say that we cannot judge anybody is, according to Judaism, incorrect. Not only incorrect, it is morally reprehensible. Not only is it morally reprehensible, it does not allow us to appreciate our fellow human being. But when we judge somebody favorably, that is giving us the ability to appreciate them, to value them, to see how special, how good they are. And because of that, how humble we have to be in front of them. But we completely don't judge somebody. You know what that means? To say that I am better than you. This is why I say they're the most judgmental. Because the moment someone says they're better than you, they're judging you. And they're putting you down. So someone who is humble has space for another person, has space for us to see the qualities in the other person. Someone who is arrogant has no room for another person, and all they see is themselves, and there's no room to see even the quality of another person, especially if that person doesn't agree with them. But the Rebbe and the Torah tells us to the contrary. You could only not judge somebody negatively, but you should judge them favorably. And let's look inside chapter 30. I'm going to share the screen. One who suffers from timtum halev, someone who suffers from a clogged heart or a congested sense of self, must also set his heart to fulfill the instruction of our sages, which is, be lowly of spirit before every man. You want to appreciate everybody, be lowly of spirit. Now, the Rebbe addresses a very important detail, and I want to talk about this for one moment because I think it'll help us understand some of the concepts and how we can truly be a happy, well-rounded, understandable, and good person. There's two aspects within being humble, okay? There's someone who feels lowly, okay? Then there's someone who has humility. The sages, when the verse tells us, you shall be lowly in front of everyone, they actually say lowly doesn't make sense. It's more having humility in front of everybody. But if you're lowly, then in a sense, you're allowing people to trample on you, then you're leaving no room for your own existence, and then you can't even appreciate them or help them out. Alter Rebbe says, no. The wording is precise. The word lowly is there for a precise reason and an exact teaching, and the word has to be there. It's not just being humble, having humility, but also lowly. What is that? Why? Now, the Rebbe explains. Because if you just have humility, then it's possible for you to come to the conclusion that in front of this person, I have humility, but not in front of that person. In front of this person who is mostly good, also has some bad, I can be humble in front of that person. But this other person who's did all these terrible things, I'm not that bad. That person is worse than me. Right? Alter Rebbe says that that's a dangerous way to think. We really have to train ourselves to not only think, not only believe, but to behave in a manner where we truly 100% recognize that even the most lowly person, even the greatest sinner, the greatest transgressor, the worst human being, we are still lower than them. How could that be? So let's look inside, as Alter Rebbe will expound upon this, that to truly grow, we have to feel lower and see a value in even the lowest of the low. Okay? Can you imagine that? Hard for us to understand. But when we see a value in the lowest of the low, it's easy to see a value in someone who's great. It's easy to see a value in someone who is 3/4 great. It's easy to see a value in the person who is half and half. But to see a value in someone who's the lowest of low, who is just a piece of nothing, that's hard to do. But when we do that, then we not only lift up that person, we also lift up ourselves, as we see inside. The wording implies, the wording that we have to see ourselves as low in front of everyone, and do not merely act thus in all sincerity. In the presence of every man, even in the presence of the most religiously irreverent people. What does that mean? That even someone who seems to be, we'll use the term, I don't like to use the term, but just for 1 second, an absolute coarse human being who has sinned, still, we cannot judge that other person. Why not? Because our sages tell us judge not your fellow man until you stood in their place. Judge not your fellow man until you have stood, i.e., place yourself in his place. What does this mean? That because it's impossible for any single human being to completely put ourselves in the place of another human being, therefore, we could never judge the other person. Let's take, for example, okay? The Alter Rebbe met this individual who came to him with all his transgressions. Alter Rebbe found 7 things, qualities that this person has that he does not have in himself. We don't know what the Alter Rebbe says, but let's suppose Alter Rebbe came to the conclusion and said, I was born to a great family. Maybe this person wasn't born to a great family. That's why they did this. I was born to loving parents. Maybe this person had parents that didn't like him or her. I was born into a family that has food on the table. Maybe this child didn't have food on the table. I was born into a nice community. Maybe this person grew up with hooligans all around. I was born in a safe environment. Maybe this person was born in a contentious environment. There are millions of scenarios that a person could have gone through, and it's impossible for us to ever put ourselves into their shoes. And because it's impossible for us to stand in their place, therefore it's impossible for us to judge them. So what then is left for us? If we can't judge them, then we shouldn't judge them. So then why am I living in a world where there are other people? And therefore the answer must be, so I should learn from them. Not judge them, but see how we can learn something favorable from them, how they could inspire us, even any person that we met. Therefore, some people may have a warm disposition. They may be very loving, warm. You see them, how are you? So nice and so kind, right? Some people are very standoffish. That's their nature. That's their inborn nature. Here, the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us a very important thing, and that is that although we cannot judge another person, because we can never possibly be in their shoes, it is not an excuse for our bad behavior. It's only an excuse for us not to look down at that person, but it's not a way to excuse our behavior. For example, if I have the tendency to be a kleptomaniac, to take everything that I see, right? Maybe I was born with that tendency. That's not an excuse for me to take everything that I touch. I have to work on myself and work through that I shouldn't do that. If I have the tendency to speak and to respond to someone without thinking twice, even if it hurts the other person's feeling, then I have to work on myself to try to change that character trait. If I have the tendency to give jabs at people, I have to work on myself not to do that. But if I see someone else that has the tendency to give jabs at somebody else, I shouldn't be the one to judge them. I have to say, they have other good qualities. Do you understand the fine line? Is it clear? Any questions? So Alter Rebbe is, in other words, telling us that when it comes to our behavior, we are responsible for our behavior. If we have a negative character trait, we have to work on it. If we see it in somebody else, it's not our business to judge them. We have to just see their fine qualities that they do have. Of course, it's our business to help them and to try to elevate them and motivate them, but not by looking down at them. It is by saying, look at the inner qualities, the potential that you have. Let's try to bring out your good qualities. So a teacher in a class that sees a kid misbehaving, instead of addressing the aggressive behavior, the teacher will address the potential qualities of this child understanding mathematics. Wow, you're so good at math. Let's spend the time looking at math. And you know what's going to happen? Their aggressive tendencies will fall prey. They're not going to give into it. It'll become weaker over time. So Alter Rebbe essentially then today is giving us very important life skills. And that is, in one simple term, always look at yourself as being lower than the person next to you. Now, one can take from that and become depressed over that. I'm lower than everyone. Forget it, good for nothing. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe quantifies and tells us what he means when he says, see yourself as lower for someone else. Don't allow it to lead you down a road of depression or of giving up. But to the contrary, look at yourself as being low and find within yourself the strength to work on yourself and to strengthen your weak links that you have. But if we don't see ourselves as lower than somebody else, we see ourselves always as better than somebody else, then we will never come to appreciate and to grow and to love the world that we live in to its maximum, because this is who I am. And going back to the beginning of the class, we're not alive, motivated to grow. We're just going to remain stagnant. And let's see how the Alter Rebbe continues. Why can't we judge somebody else? For it is literally his place, i.e., his physical environment that causes him to sin. We don't know what went on in their home. We have no idea how they were brought up. We don't know what kind of teachers they had, what kind of friends they had. We don't know what shows their parents let them watch when they were 8 years old. We don't know anything. We don't even know what kind of job this person has and what this person sees when they are on the job. Maybe your job is in the office. This person's job is out on the street. Who knows? Since his livelihood requires him to go about the marketplace all day. Years ago, where did someone sell their wares? Not on the internet, but in the marketplace, in the flea market, where all sorts of shenanigans take place. And whenever he is not thus engaged, he is of those who sit on the street corners. Thus, his eyes see all sorts of temptation, and what the eyes see, the heart desires. Additionally, it may be his spiritual place, the nature of his evil impulse that leads him to sin, and his evil nature burns like a baker's fiery oven. What does it mean, a baker's fiery oven? An oven is hot. A baker's oven is even hotter even than the hottest day here in Arizona. But the heat is so strong that it's so hard to break away the fire inside me to do that transgression or that sin or that desirable thing is so strong, it is miserably painful to try to break away from it. It burns like a flaming fire. It is different, however, with he who goes about but little in the marketplace, and most of the day he is at home rather than at the street corners, and he therefore encounters less temptation. And even if he does go about the marketplace all day, so that his physical place is the same as that of a kasha b'kal, the low of the low, it may be that his spiritual place is different in that he is not so passionate by nature and is therefore not as greatly tempted by the sights of the first place, of the marketplace. Why? And this is a key. For the evil impulse is not the same in everyone. One person's nature may be more passionate and the other is less, as explained elsewhere. So based upon all this, we can understand how not only should we not, we cannot, it's impossible to judge another person. It is simply an impossibility. We have no idea what the other person went through, is going through, saw, felt, heard. We do not know. What then can we do? We can find value in this person. But what does it do for us? And this is the point of what we are trying to do. How can I overcome my feelings of not being empathetic, not caring for the other person, I have to realize that if that person was in my situation, they will be much better than me. Because I don't know what they went through, but it could be they went through a lot of trauma, a lot of hardships that led them to this. Therefore, only thing that is left for me is to love them and to respect them and care for them. And for me, as for me, I have to work on myself because I should be better. Because the way I grew up, the things that I learned, the things that I experienced, I should be behaving much better as a result of those things. And if I didn't experience good things, if I experienced a lot of hardship in my life, that's not either an excuse, the Alter Rebbe says. I just simply have to work harder. I have to find it within me and correct my ways. Work through the hardships and the challenges that I'm dealing with, but not use it as an excuse not to be a better, more godly person. Does this make sense? Any questions? So let's learn a little bit more inside. I want to read this last paragraph again. For the evil impulse is not the same in everyone. You can be sitting right now, 20 people in a class, and everyone has different degrees of their fire inside of them. Their good fire and also their bad fire. In truth, even he who is extremely passionate by nature and whose livelihood obliges him to sit all day in the street corners has no excuse whatsoever for his sins. Still, the Alter Rebbe says this is not an excuse. You can't say, oh, I grew up in a bad environment. I learned all these bad things. I have all these bad words that I've learned from them. I'm going to use these curse words because that's the way I learned to speak. He says, no, it's not an excuse. And if you behave in the bad manner, you're considered an utter evildoer for not having the dread of God before your eyes. Why? For you should have controlled himself and restrained the feeling of desire in his heart because of the fear of God. The Alter Rebbe is talking about this is the thing we have to tell ourselves. Again, we cannot tell this to somebody else. This is something we tell myself. Even though I went through all these things, I saw all these things, it's not an excuse for me to still sin. I have to work on myself not to behave in a improper manner against God. Because I have to control myself and restrain myself, the feeling of desire in his heart. Why? Because I should fear God. And this fear of God would have enabled me, if I would have had this fear of God all the time, and I should have it, it would have enabled me to overcome the desire, despite the difficulties imposed by the surroundings of my nature. As explained above, the mind has supremacy over the heart by nature of one's birth. It is man's inborn characteristic that his mind is able to master and restrain his heart's desire. So Alter Rebbe is telling us, you think you cannot do it. You think, I'm too weak to do it. We hear that Alter Rebbe says, no. Sorry, buddy, it is not too hard. In fact, a man's inborn characteristic is that we have the power to control our heart. We can do it. And by doing it, we learn to live a more humble life, which means a more happy life, which means that we are more alive and we're more with it. And with this, I want to thank you for joining in today's class. It's great seeing you. Any questions?